Mike.
Yeah, we're okay.
Okay, shut the thing off.
Shut it down.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Meet you there.
Okay.
One minute hook, Tony Beets' reputation, and the shocking discovery. If you've spent any time watching Gold Rush, you already understand one thing very clearly. Tony Beets does not startle easily. This is a man who built an empire from frozen mud and broken machinery. He's stared down disasters that would flatten most crews, resurrected rusting giants of industrial history, and sworn his way through every kind of catastrophe the Yukon could possibly throw at him. For decades, the land has tested him, challenged him, and tried to break him. And every time, Tony pushed right back. When word began to circulate that even Tony Beets had been stopped in his tracks by something hidden beneath his own property, people paid attention. It didn't begin with a massive explosion or some dramatic cave-in. There was no warning, no headlines, no emergency crews rushing in. It began quietly, with a simple dig, the kind of routine task Tony's crew could perform half asleep. The type of work so ordinary it barely deserves a mention in the daily log. And yet, within hours, everything changed. The first whispers moved through the crew. Then the locals around Dawson City started talking. Soon, the mining community itself was buzzing. Now, people across the internet are trying to piece together what Tony Beets never expected to uncover beneath the land he has walked, worked, and trusted for years. Whatever you believe about Tony, whatever you think you know about the Klondike, this discovery forces all of it into question. The Klondike never gives up its secrets easily. If there is one truth most miners eventually accept, it's this. The ground does not give up its secrets willingly. Nowhere on Earth is that more evident than in the Klondike. This is not just a mining region. It is a historical vault. A geological puzzle box, layered, compressed, flooded, frozen, and reshaped over centuries. The land itself is a record keeper. Entire camps have vanished without leaving so much as a trace on the surface. Journals, tools, cabins, machinery, even entire human stories disappear beneath the soil, preserved in silence. Permafrost makes this place different. Once the ground freezes solid, sometimes to depths exceeding 100 meters, time nearly stops. Organic material, wood, metal, paper, even footprints can remain intact for centuries. Archaeologists have uncovered prehistoric hunting tools, boots from the 1898 gold stampers, handwritten letters sealed in ice, and entire cabins preserved so perfectly it's as if their owners only stepped away moments earlier. Most miners dig their entire careers and never truly know what lies just beneath their boots. Tony Beets is not most miners. After more than 40 years in the Yukon, Tony has developed an almost unnatural ability to read the land. He understands gravel patterns, soil density, water channels, and subtle changes in ground behavior that most engineers fresh out of school never even notice. He's watched pits collapse in slow motion. He's seen gold streaks bend and shift where they shouldn't. He's dug through layers of earth that quietly rewrite everything people think they know about the Klondike. And still, nothing in all those decades prepared him for what happened on that warm Yukon morning. The routine job that went wrong. The job was simple: trenching a utility line beside Tony's home base. In mining terms, trenching is nothing. Dig straight, drop the pipe, backfill, compact, move on. No drama, no mystery. just another task on a long list of tasks that keep an operation running. Near Tony's place, just outside Dawson City, the soil layers are predictable. First comes the organic surface material, then compact silt. Beneath that, glacial gravel mixed with stones of every size. And finally, the true obstacle of northern mining, permafrost, a dense, ice-locked layer that turns even the strongest machines into whining children. That is what the crew expected to find. That is not what they found. The first sign, the sound of metal. The excavator operator heard it before anyone else. It wasn't the dull thud of rock. It wasn't the scrape of a buried boulder. It was a sharp, hollow ring. Metal. Not the flimsy clang of a crushed oil drum or rusted scrap either. This was heavy, solid, resistant. The bucket pulled back. The sound came again. Whatever was down there pushed back. In the Klondike, strange finds are not uncommon. The massive dredges of the late 1800s and early 1900s reshaped entire valleys. They processed river bottoms, carved hillsides, and left behind layers of industrial debris. Miners often stumble across broken tools, stove fragments, sheet metal, and forgotten equipment buried beneath dredge spoils. But this behaved differently. Instead of bending, flaking, or breaking, it held firm. So the operator did what Yukon miners always do when something doesn't behave the way it should. He shut down the machine, and he called for Tony. Tony Beets arrived within minutes, boots crunching over thawing ground. His posture was calm, almost casual, the body language of a man who has untangled strange situations his entire life. At first glance, even he assumed it was nothing special. Another forgotten remnant of the gold rush era. The land is full of them. But as the excavator carefully shaved away more soil, the object began revealing itself. Wide, curved, structured. This wasn't scrap. This wasn't a container. This was part of something larger. Every foot of soil removed only made that clearer. Tony leaned against the bucket and stared for a long moment before finally saying the words that froze the entire crew. Well, that's not supposed to be there. He was right. No records of what lies below. There were no records of any underground structure on that parcel of land. None in government maps, none in mining registries, none in corporate archives from the Yukon Consolidated Gold Corporation, none in public documents of any kind. The land around Dawson City has passed through countless hands over the decades. Some areas were heavily mined. Others were skipped due to cost, low gold values, or thick permafrost. But nowhere did any surviving record mention a subterranean installation beneath Tony's current residence and shop grounds. That didn't make the discovery impossible. It made it extraordinarily rare. A call went out to a local geotechnical specialist. A historian familiar with early mining efforts was contacted. Their first conclusion was immediate and unanimous. Whatever this was, it was not modern. Careful excavation and changing soil layers. The crew expanded the trench slowly. As they dug deeper, the ground told its story. The familiar glacial gravel gave way to compacted silt that hadn't been disturbed in more than a century. Then came a fine layer of sand, the fingerprint of ancient flooding, dating back to before dredges permanently reshaped the region's waterways. And beneath that, the metal structure continued, disappearing beneath frozen ground. What began as an hour-long task had transformed into a controlled excavation of something far older and far more deliberate than anyone expected. Tony Beets, a man who thrives on forward motion, found himself standing still, staring directly into the past, buried beneath his own property. Whatever lay below was no accident, no forgotten scrap, no trivial relic. It was the beginning of a story, sealed by ice for over a century. And this was only the beginning. H2. Strong. The emotional shift. Tony faces the past. P. For a man who lives by momentum, standing still is not something Tony Beets does easily. P. Yet there he was, boots planted at the edge of the trench, eyes fixed on something no one had ever recorded, documented, or explained. For the first time in decades, the land he thought he understood had introduced a new chapter, one written long before his arrival, long before modern mining reshaped the Klondike, long before cameras ever followed his every move. This was not just another obstacle to overcome. It was history breaking through the surface. Tony's expression shifted from curiosity to calculation, not fear. Tony Beets is not wired that way, but recognition. Whatever they had uncovered was not random. It was not an accident of erosion or a misplaced piece of equipment. Someone, at some point, had put it there, and they had gone to significant effort to ensure it remained buried. The weight of that realization settled over the site. Crew members who moments earlier were joking now worked in silence. Machines idled. The wind carried nothing but the quiet crackle of thawing earth and the distant calls of ravens overhead. The Yukon itself seemed to pause, as if acknowledging that something long hidden had finally surfaced. For Tony, the past was no longer a story told in archives or photographs. It was under his boots. Transition to this discovery matters. To understand why this moment mattered, not just to Tony, but to the entire region, you have to understand the land itself. The Klondike is not ordinary ground. It is one of the most carefully preserved historical landscapes on Earth, not because humans protected it, but because nature did. Ice locked everything in place. Floods rearranged layers like pages in a book. Then permafrost sealed the record and refused to let it go. Every serious miner in the Yukon eventually learns a hard lesson. The surface is lying to you. Beneath even the most familiar claim lies a story you haven't heard yet. That is what made this discovery different. It wasn't just the presence of metal underground. That happens. It was the depth, the soil sequence, the absence of any documentation, and the unmistakable sense that this structure had been intentionally placed and intentionally tracing the past and what the Yukon's hidden layers can tell us. The Klondike is a geological and historical time capsule. Over the last 2 centuries alone, it has witnessed the rise and collapse of mining empires, violent floods that rewrote entire valleys, technological revolutions that turned manual labor into mechanized conquest, and the largest gold stampede the world has ever known. When something is buried here, it has a far better chance of surviving the passage of time than almost anywhere else on the planet. Permafrost changes everything. Once the ground freezes, oxygen disappears. Decay slows to a crawl. Wood hardens instead of rotting. Metal oxidizes but remains structurally intact. Even organic material, leather, paper, fabric, can survive generations sealed inside frozen soil. That is why archaeologists have recovered prehistoric hunting tools. intact boots from 1898 prospectors, handwritten letters preserved in ice, and entire cabins entombed beneath dredged tailings. All of it frozen in place. All of it waiting. When Tony's crew exposed the curved metal structure beneath his property, historians and geologists immediately recognized the significance. Not because finding old objects in the Klondike is unusual, but because this one did not fit the patterns. The location was wrong. The depth was unusual. The construction suggested planning, not abandonment. Something about it didn't belong to the known story of the region. A region built on forgotten stories. During the height of the Klondike gold rush between 1896 and 1899, tens of thousands of people flooded into the region. They built towns overnight. They tore valleys apart. They abandoned camps just as quickly when claims dried up or winter set in. Many of those places were never recorded properly. Some prospectors operated outside official channels. Some companies hid operations from competitors. Others collapsed so completely that their records vanished along with them. The Yukon is full of missing pages. And now, beneath Tony Beets' property, one of those pages had resurfaced. What could it be? Speculation began almost immediately. Some wondered if it was part of an early experimental mining operation. Others suggested it could be a forgotten transport tunnel, a buried support structure, or even part of an unrecorded industrial project from the early 1900s. What everyone agreed on was this: whatever it was, someone had invested time, labor, and planning to put it there, and then erase it from history. And the land had protected that secret ever since. H2. Strong. The weight of the discovery. / by now, word of the find had moved far beyond Tony's crew. Period. Geologists, historians, long-time miners, everyone had a theory, but no one had an answer. The Klondike has a way of doing that. It invites speculation and withholds conclusions. The deeper they looked at the structure, the clearer one thing became. This was not something that ended up here by chance. The layers of soil told their own story. The fine sand from ancient flooding sealed beneath compacted silt. The glacial gravel above that. The frozen earth locking everything in place like a vault door. Each layer represented an era of the Yukon's past, and the structure lay beneath all of it, untouched. This was not simply buried. It was entombed. Tony Beets, a man who has pulled millions in gold from the ground, now stood over something with a different kind of value. Not measured in ounces or dollars, but in time, memory, and unanswered questions. The Yukon had handed him something far more powerful than gold. It had handed him a story. A land that remembers everything. The Klondike does not forget. It merely waits. For centuries, this region has absorbed the ambitions of dreamers, the failures of empires, the sweat of laborers, and the secrets of those who came chasing fortune. Most of those stories were never written down. They were pressed into the soil, layered under ice, and left behind when the world moved on. What Tony's crew uncovered was one of those stories, a chapter no one knew existed. And once the ground opens a door like that, it rarely closes it again. The meaning behind the mystery. For Tony, the discovery forced something unexpected: reflection. He had always believed he understood his land better than anyone. Decades of digging, building, restoring, and risking everything on the Yukon's unpredictable terrain had taught him its moods and movements. But now the ground had revealed something it had never shared before. There is humility in that. When a man who has conquered the earth his entire life realizes the earth still holds secrets from him. The structure beneath his property was not just a curiosity. It was a reminder that history does not belong to those who write it. It belongs to the land that preserves it. Why this changes everything. Most mining discoveries end with numbers. This one ends with questions. Who built it? Why was it placed there? Why was it never recorded? And what else might the Klondike still be hiding? Tony Beets did not just uncover metal. He uncovered the silence of a century. And once that silence is broken, it can never return. Closing reflection. Some men spend their lives chasing gold and never find it. Some find gold and think the story ends there. Tony Beets found something else. He found proof that the past is not finished with us. That beneath the noise of modern life, beneath the machines and money and ambition, the earth is still quietly holding its breath, waiting for the right moment to speak. And on that warm Yukon morning, under the boots of one of the Klondike's greatest legends, the ground finally spoke. H2, the land still isn't done speaking. Even after the machines powered down and the crew packed up for the day, the discovery refused to leave anyone's thoughts. Conversations lingered long into the evening. Old miners recalled half-forgotten rumors passed down by their fathers and grandfathers, stories of early operations that vanished without explanation, of investors who lost everything and quietly disappeared from the Yukon records. None of it could be confirmed, but now, for the first time, those stories felt uncomfortably close to reality. Subparagraph. The next morning, Tony returned to the site before anyone else. He stood alone at the edge of the trench as the sun crept over the spruce trees, its light catching the frozen soil and the curved metal edge still visible below. For a man whose life had been defined by motion, this moment of stillness mattered. He wasn't calculating costs or production schedules. He was listening to the land, to the silence, to the weight of everything that had come before him. Because once you uncover something like this, you don't just keep digging for gold. You start digging for answers. The Yukon has always had a way of humbling even the toughest people who try to tame it. It reminds them that every generation is just a visitor, that no amount of machinery or money truly conquers time. What Tony and his crew found beneath his property was not just an object from the past. It was a message, a reminder that the land has its own memory, and it decides when to share it. Historians and geologists continued their work, carefully documenting every exposed layer, every shift in soil color, every unusual pattern. Each observation added another thread to a growing web of mystery. The more they learned, the clearer it became that this structure had been deliberately placed and deliberately forgotten, hidden beneath layers of earth and ice, as if someone had hoped the future would never come looking. But the future did come looking. It always does. For Tony Beets, the discovery changed the way he looked at the ground he had walked for decades. Every patch of soil now carried new possibility. Every trench could hide another chapter of a story no one had ever told. And in the Yukon, where the past and present are never far apart, that realization lingers long after the machines fall silent. Some discoveries bring wealth. Others bring fame. This one brought something heavier: perspective. Because when a man who has spent his life extracting treasure from the earth realizes the earth has been quietly guarding its own treasure all along, it changes the meaning of everything he does next. The Klondike is not finished revealing itself. Not to Tony, not to anyone. And somewhere beneath the frozen ground, more forgotten stories are still waiting for the moment they too decide to surface.